9 men, 4 minutes a day, 24 weeks. That's the entire study a Tokyo team ran when they massaged one side of 9 Japanese men's scalps and left the other side untouched as the control. No pills, no prescription, just pressure applied daily on one half of a head. But here's the part that made dermatologists sit up. The massage side grew measurably thicker hair than the side that got nothing. The technique built into Japanese scalp care for decades is what we're breaking down today. And it isn't a TikTok trend or a supplement pitch. If you look into hair thinning even a little, you already know the 2 names that dominate the conversation. Minoxidil, the liquid or foam you rub on daily forever, or the shedding comes back. And finasteride, the pill that touches your hormones, and for a percentage of men, touches other things too. Both work to a point. Minoxidil's own trial data puts the response rate around 30 to 40% over 4 to 6 months, and even then, results tend to fade once you stop applying it. Finasteride does better on paper, closer to 80% over 2 years, but it's a daily hormonal intervention, and plenty of men decide the trait isn't worth it. So Japan, a country with a documented lower rate of severe androgenetic alopecia than most Western populations, went a different direction, not instead of medicine. Alongside it, or in place of it for men who want it out of the pharmacy aisle entirely. And the approach splits into 2 tracks that reinforce each other: what you do to the scalp and what you put in your body. We'll take them one at a time, starting with the one that has an actual clinical trial behind it. The scalp massage study came out of a research group studying 9 healthy Japanese men ages 25 to 46, none of them with visible hair loss yet. Each man had one side of his scalp massage for 4 minutes daily using a device called the Panasonic EHHM75, spinning at 170 rotations per minute. The other side got nothing. That's the control on the same head, which is what makes the comparison hard to argue with. After 24 weeks, the researchers measured hair thickness on both sides. The massage side had gone from an average of 0.085 millimeters to 0.092 millimeters. That sounds small until you're the one losing hair, because thickness is exactly what thinning takes away first, long before you go bald. But the lab study only tells you it works under controlled conditions. What happens when regular people, not researchers, try it at home? A separate self-reported survey followed over 300 people doing scalp massage on their own, and it found something worth knowing before you start. The average person who noticed new hair growth had logged about 36 hours of total massage time first, spread across 4 to 5 months. That's roughly 15 minutes a day, every day for months, before anything visible happens. Diffuse thinning responded better than the deep, receding hairline pattern. This is not an overnight fix. It's closer to physical therapy for your scalp, and it only works if you actually keep showing up. Why would rubbing your own head do anything at all? The leading theory is mechanical, not magical. Hair follicles sit in a layer of tissue that gets stiffer and tighter as androgenetic alopecia progresses, the same way scar tissue tightens around an old injury. Researchers use something called finite element analysis, essentially a stress mapping model, to show that massage physically stretches the dermal papilla cells, the ones at the base of each follicle that control the hair growth cycle. Stretch those cells in a lab dish, and you can watch certain hair cycle genes shift their activity. The theory holds that daily massage does to a tight, under-circulated scalp what months of physical therapy do to a frozen shoulder. It loosens what's stuck. Here's how the technique actually works. The version Japanese barbershops and home care routines have used for years. Fingertips, not nails, pressing into the scalp with real pressure, not a light stroke. Start at the base of the skull and work in small circular motions up toward the crown, spending extra time over the temples and the crown itself, since that's where androgenetic thinning shows up first. 4 minutes, minimum once a day, and dermatologists who study this recommend treating it like brushing your teeth. Same time, every day, or the habit dies in week 2. Now for the second track, the one that doesn't involve touching your head at all. Japan's traditional diet has its own research trail, and it's a longer one than the massage studies. A cohort of nearly 93,000 Japanese adults tracked for almost 19 years scored their eating habits against 8 markers: high rice miso soup, seaweed, pickled vegetables, green vegetables, fish, green tea, and low red meat. The people who scored highest on that index had a meaningfully lower risk of dying from any cause during the study period. That's not a hair study, but a point that something researchers think matters for thinning too, because the same hormone driving most male pattern loss, DHT, is influenced by diet. DHT is a hormone finasteride blocks with a pill. It's produced when an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase converts testosterone into a more aggressive form that shrinks hair follicles over time. In lab testing, rice bran extract, the same rice bran left over from the polished white rice in every Japanese meal, suppressed the genes responsible for producing that enzyme. Not eliminated it, suppressed it in a petri dish under lab conditions. It's early evidence, not a green light to swap your prescription for a bowl of rice, but it's a real mechanism, not a wellness blog guess. Green tea gets the same treatment in the research. Its catechins, the antioxidant compounds that give it that slightly bitter edge, have been studied specifically for androgenetic alopecia, and the working theory again comes back to that same DHT pathway. Seaweed shows up too, less for hair directly and more because it's loaded with minerals tied to lower rates of several conditions across Japanese populations, hair health included by extension, since a stress, nutrient-poor body sheds hair as one of its first visible symptoms. And this isn't some undiscovered secret either. Walk into a drugstore in Tokyo and you'll find an entire aisle dedicated to scalp tonics, most of them descended from a brand called Kaminomoto, which has been selling scalp circulation tonics since 1928. Locals sometimes call it Japan's Minoxidil, even though the two products work through completely different mechanisms, one topically dilating blood vessel, the other relying on massage and circulation boosting botanicals. The tonic itself isn't magic. What matters is that an entire retail category has existed in Japan for nearly a century, built around one premise: treat the scalp environment first, treat the follicle second. That's a different starting philosophy than the Western approach, which usually starts and ends with a prescription. It's worth being honest about genetics here too, because a chunk of the gap between Japanese and Western hair loss rates isn't behavioral at all. Androgenetic alopecia is documented as more prevalent in Caucasian populations than East Asian ones, and researchers point to differences in androgen receptor sensitivity and enzyme activity that have nothing to do with what anyone eats or how anyone massages their scalp. So no, this isn't the one trick doctors don't want you to know, and anyone selling it that way is lying to you. Some of Japan's advantage was written into the population before anyone touched a scalp tonic. But genetic explaining part of a gap doesn't erase the part that scalp massage and diet are independently shown to influence, and that's the part you actually have control over. There's a third piece most breakdowns of this topic skip entirely, and it's the one connecting hair to everything else going on in your body. Stress, not the vague just relax kind of advice, but a specific hormonal chain reaction. When stress runs chronic, your adrenal glands keep pumping out cortisol, and sustained cortisol activates what's called the HPA axis, the same stress signaling loop tied to stubborn belly fat and disrupted sleep. Harvard researchers found that elevated stress hormones directly suppress the stem cells sitting inside your hair follicles, locking them in a resting phase instead of letting them cycle back into growth. A 2024 study went further and showed the mechanism at the cellular level. The stress hormone CRH shuts down a self-cleaning process inside dermal papilla cells called autophagy, and without it, those cells are more likely to die off entirely. That's the biology behind the phrase, "stress made my hair fall out." And it's a real biological chain, not an exaggeration. Cortisol does to your scalp what it does to your waistline and your sleep cycle. Just somewhere, you can actually watch it happen in the mirror. And that's where sleep enters the picture too, because poor sleep keeps cortisol elevated the same way chronic stress does, creating a loop that's hard to break from either direction. Fix the sleep and cortisol tends to settle. Let cortisol run high and sleep gets worse. Japanese scalp care culture has always paired the massage habit with this idea implicitly, since 4 minutes of slow, repetitive pressure on your own head right before bed doubles as a wind-down ritual, lowering the exact hormone working against your follicles while you sleep. Quick note before the how-to, because the comments always ask, the core massage study only enrolled men, but the mechanism it tests, mechanical stretch on the dermal papilla, isn't a male-specific process, and the self-reported survey following diffuse thinning specifically found it responded better than a receding hairline, which matters because diffuse thinning is the pattern most common in women. The telogen effluvium research, the stress-driven shedding, actually skews toward women in the clinical literature. So if you're a woman dealing with diffuse thinning rather than a classic male pattern, the massage and stress management pieces apply just as directly. The DHT-focused diet research leans more toward male pattern loss, specifically since DHT is the dominant driver there. One more thing worth clearing up while we're here, this is not a biotin gummy pitch. Biotin deficiency can cause hair shedding, but actual deficiency is rare in anyone eating a normal diet, and dumping more biotin into an already sufficient system hasn't been shown to do much of anything for hair that isn't deficient to begin with. If a bottle promises regrowth from a vitamin alone, that's the supplement industry borrowing credibility from a narrow medical finding and stretching it over everyone. Real rice, real seaweed, real miso as part of an actual diet is a different category of claim than a gummy bear. So here's the actual step-by-step, the version you can start tonight instead of just nodding along to. Wash your hands or don't. Fingertip oil isn't the concern here. Sit somewhere you won't be interrupted for 5 minutes. Place both hands at the base of your skull, thumbs anchored behind your ears, and press firmly enough that you feel the scalp move slightly over the skull underneath it, not just your fingers sliding over hair. Work in small circles, maybe the size of a coin, moving upward in overlapping rows toward the crown. Spend roughly 90 seconds over each temple and 90 seconds at the crown, since that's where the miniaturization starts for most men. Then finish with a final minute working the whole scalp in broader strokes. 4 minutes total every single night, ideally at the same time, so it turns into a habit instead of a task you have to remember. The mistakes are almost always the same 3. People press too lightly, treating it like petting a cat instead of applying real sustained pressure, and light pressure doesn't generate the mechanical stretch the research is actually measuring. People quit at 3 weeks, right around the point where the self-reported data says most participants still hadn't logged even half their eventual 36 hours. And people expected to work in isolation while sleeping 5 hours a night and running on stress and coffee, ignoring the exact cortisol pathway that can undo whatever the massage is trying to build. So what does putting it all together actually look like? Daily scalp massage, 4 minutes minimum, fingertip pressure, done consistently for months, not days. A diet that leans toward the traditional Japanese pattern: rice, fish, seaweed, green tea, vegetables, and less red meat, not as a hair supplement, but as the eating pattern an entire country's dermatological outcomes are quietly built on. And realistic expectations, because nothing here works in 2 weeks and none of it replaces an actual dermatologist if your hairline is moving fast, because that speed can signal something. Medication treats better than a massage ever will. Will it outperform Minoxidil for a man already deep into advanced pattern baldness? Almost certainly not, and no honest breakdown of this research would claim otherwise. But for the much bigger group, the ones catching diffuse thinning early, wanting to avoid a lifelong prescription, or just wanting to add something with actual data behind it to what they're already doing, this is the version of the Japanese hair method that survives a fact check instead of a supplement company's word. There's also the question of what you're actually trying to protect: a hairline, sure. But underneath that, most men chasing this topic are chasing something closer to control, some proof that the thing happening to their head isn't just inevitable decline they have to sit and watch. A pill can hand you a number, a response rate, a percentage. A 4-minute ritual you keep every single night for 6 months hands you something a little different. Evidence that you showed up on the nights you didn't feel like it for a result you couldn't see yet. Was 4 minutes a day every day for 6 months worth it to the 9 men in that study? Their scalps thickened slightly, measurably, on the exact side that got the pressure and nowhere else. Their habit held long enough to prove it wasn't chance. And somewhere between the fingertip pressure and the bowl of rice and miso and seaweed sitting on a table in Tokyo, that's the real answer this country has been quietly sitting on the whole time. Not a secret, just a habit, kept longer than almost anyone is willing to keep one.